The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision the Fire Store makes as a company is about its customers. As the holiday season has quickly approached, explore a wide selection of unique and practical gifts at the Fire Store's Gift Center. Find the perfect presents for firefighters, EMTs, and first responders today. The Fire Store's goal is to get you the gear you need when you need it at prices you can afford. Visit thefirestore.com for everything but the truck and shop its family of brands including Streamlight, MSA, Lion, Fleer, and more.
Fire Service Data and Tech Talk.
Hey everybody, it's Eddie Buchanan with the Fire Service Data and Tech Talk on fire engineering. Welcome back to another episode. We're going to have a lot of fun talking about data and technology this afternoon. And a couple of things I want to mention before we get started. The Technology Summit International, TSI we call it, is coming up in December. It's December 5 through 7 in Irving, Texas. It's right outside of Dallas, literally around the corner from DFW. So very easy to get to. So you want to go check that out, the TSI, Technology Summit International. It's a great conference, particularly for the kind of things we talk about on this show. And even some of our guests today will be presenting there. So it's a very cool conference. Also, the VCOS Symposium in the Sun is actually happening as we speak, as this show is airing initially in November. So that's down in Clearwater Beach, Florida. I'll be over there doing some live streams, some kind of man in the street sort of things for that particular conference. So I hope I'll catch you there as well. But for this week, for this show, I want to welcome my friends from Loudoun County Fire Rescue. I've got Captain Henry Charles and Maria Taylor. Folks, say hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Maria, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from and what you do and all those sorts of things.
I have been working for Loudoun County Fire and Rescue for about 23 years. I started as a traditional planner working for the planning department, and I was recruited to come to Loudoun to help them with the legislative processes and determining where stations should go and help them with the processes of getting them online, where to put them, applications to the Planning Commission, in dealing with all of that. And most recently, I've started joining in with Captain Charles doing more of the data analytics for the department. So we provide the information to the department and to all of our agencies that require data. And also I assist with facilities group still building new fire stations and things like that. And everything that the fire chief thinks I should be part of, as always.
Other duties as assigned, as
Yep.
they say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Thank you very much.
And Captain Henry Charles, sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Actually, right now, I'm celebrating my 19th year in Loudoun County this month. So congratulations to me. So
yeah.
For those 19 years, most of that time has been spent in operational, in the field. And in April of 21, I came up here to administration to work in administration, planning and data analytics. So,
do you have any? How was that transition coming from ops? It's one thing to go from ops to admin. It's another thing to go from ops to data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very challenging. At the same time that I did that, the department was going through a change also, going from a 24/72 schedule to a 24/48 with a Kelly. So I also was going through and watching what was going on within the field as I was up here. And so it wasn't that big of a change. And prior to actually coming up here, I had been working with Ms. Taylor and a lot of the other people within our group doing some of the data, kind of getting onboarded over a period of a few months. So it wasn't as drastic as I imagined it was going to be, but It was still a big change going from being in a firehouse for 17 years or so and then moving into an office realm.
I understand. For folks that aren't familiar with Loudoun County, and let me make sure I say it right. It's Loudoun County Combination Fire Rescue. Is that how it goes?
It's combined.
A combination system.
Yeah, we are a combination, and it's a combined fire and rescue system. That's pretty much that's how we call it, Loudoun County Combined Fire and Rescue System. So, and we're a
What is
combination
it?
department.
Tell us about the structure. Yeah.
Yep. So we have 15 volunteer corporations. Within the volunteers, we have, I believe it's about 760 so operational members. We have about 400 or so administrative members, and we also have some support members. So we come in around maybe like 1,300 ish on the volunteer side, and on the career side. For this fiscal year, we have about 656 uniform personnel and about 110 civilian personnel that help to make up our system. So we have about 21 stations, we have 21 stations, but we have 15 volunteer corporations. And we operate on a 24/48 with a Kelly.
And the fire chief
When you guys,
is the system.
massive. Is the system chief.
Yeah, and then each
Right.
volunteer company have their own leadership and structure. So it's usually a bit of a balancing act to work with all of the volunteer companies. We do have an executive committee that is our governing body. So it's, like I said, it's a little bit of a balancing act, but we all work together.
So, actually, he's doing a class. I'll give him a little advertisement. He's doing a class at the Symposium in the Sun on leading and managing a combination system, which that's one of the larger systems I've actually heard of around the country. I mean, we're kind of neighbors. I'm from down by Richmond. You guys are just up in Northern Virginia, suburb of DC. So not too far away, but certainly a massive combination system.
It's difficult.
It makes I just got a little grayer thinking about it.
It's different to find our peers in terms of comparison for benchmarking and things like that when we are so unique in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. So, Maria, tell us about you guys work as a team, right? As kind of a data team. So what does that entail? Like for folks that are either have data teams in their fire department or wish they did, how do you have that put together in your fire department? How do y'all structure there?
We wish we were a bigger section. It's unbelievable how busy Captain Charles is trying to accommodate all the requests, and everything has a certain sense of urgency, and everybody needs it, today. So we are working on building our section. I do more of the he provides the information. I use it for determining requests to our capital improvement projects and when the stations need to be built, where and how. And he does the hard work, which is, maintaining our data sources and making sure everything is accurate, that we're capturing the right stuff, and how is that information going to be used. When we get a request, we try to determine how is this going to be used. Can we make sure that over the years our information is going to be consistent? Because we're going to be making requests for resources, we're going to be making changes to our structure. We're potentially moving units from one station to the other based on the number of calls and things like that. So it is a high responsibility section for us to provide the information and know exactly how's that information going to influence the future of our department. So our goal is to continue to establish processes that are more standardized, so we can be consistent, and our credibility levels continue to grow for the fire chief to stand in front of the public, in front of our elected officials, in front of our field staff, in front of the union, in front of a number of people that rely on this information that we're providing.
Well, you hit a key word there, a key term, credibility, right? Data credibility, and that's so important. I've seen it all over the map. I've even seen elected officials take out their calculator in a meeting to try to check data. I was, I felt bad. I was like, oh man, this is terrible. But to capture the data process is a job unto itself, right? To documenting how you did what you did so that it could be replicated and then defended if needed. That's a tremendous piece of the data analytics world. Captain, how would you define, or maybe, I don't know, it doesn't have to be that official, but I'm curious to see your take or perspective on what is the fire department's relationship to data? Like the folks in the fire station, are they aware of at all of what you do? Do they, is this something they're aware of on a regular basis? Do you have regular interaction? Is there any kind of regular reporting they might look forward to or comment on?
Yeah. So a few years ago, well, this position has been established, for a number of years, and as the years have gone by, it's gained more momentum. And recently, just a few months ago, we ended up. So we have a SharePoint site. So all of our workstations, everybody that is either a career or a volunteer, as soon as they get onto their web browser, they're pushed to a SharePoint site where we have an operational plan for the day. We have those types of pieces, resources, and right there on the main SharePoint site, we have an analytics dashboard. So that dashboard goes through and models out the previous 24 hours of operational, targets, time target compliance. It shows how many calls, the types of calls, the most busy time of the day, the most busy times of the week. And every member has the ability to go through and select different filters for periods of time, for apparatus, for call types, for AM or PM calls, for a number of different filters. And they're able to go through and do that on their own and see the results of it all. And that was a big push from our fire chief, where he wanted all the members to have the ability to answer their own questions. So if at any moment in time, somebody wonder, or if they're filling out a grant paperwork, well, they can go through there and figure out, well, how many calls did we have in the previous fiscal year? Or maybe if it's for a different application process, maybe they need calendar year data. So you can go through and specify all of those pieces and then get that information. And it's just going to show incidents, or it can show responses. And then we can also show the performance measures, like the time compliance for those. And it gives all of our users that option to, data is very valuable. And it's transparent to everybody in the fire department, whether you're a new probationary employee, or if you have 30 years in, it's available to everyone. So I think that's been a really good push from our leadership. And so most people within the fire department are aware of who we are and what we're using the data for. And as time goes on, it seems that we're using data more and more every single day for everything. Like in the past, we may have used data to help to support maybe budgetary needs. But now it seems that everybody's using data, and that's the standard. That the times of having those gut feelings or the logical approach without having the data to support it, I think that time is nearing the end, unfortunately. Or at least it is with us. We can't do anything unless we have the numbers to back it up, because I think that's the expectation of the citizens that we serve, the taxpayers and so on. They expect to see and understand what it is that you're buying and why, and they want to see justification for it. And they want to see the reasons why you need new apparatus or more apparatus or another firehouse before they sign off on it. So I think it's an important piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, I think it's important that people understand, fire chiefs have bosses, mayors, city managers, county managers, and they go to the NACO conference and the ICMA conference and they hear about data. That's what they're talking about at their conference, is they're looking at data metrics and how to, and not just in fire EMS and public safety, but across the board. And certainly in private business, that's what drives the world as well. So we're really late to the game. If you look at it from the fire service perspective, we're way behind and working our tail off to try to catch up. I'm curious, what are you using to push those dashboards? I'm sure our listeners would, just real quick.
Sure.
What kind of mechanism are you doing that with?
So we have a couple different types of dashboards. The ones that I'm talking about specifically now are are modeling out our CAD data. So the CAD data that we have Motorola P1 CAD, and we establish a couple different indexes. So it gets a little bit confusing, but basically at any moment in time, we're archiving data, usually after a 24-hour period. So we're using that archive data. We do have another dashboard that displays our real-time data, like how many units are committed to at any given time. But primarily for the analytics approach, we have to hit like pause. Because if we say, well, the filter for a 24-hour period is right now, but that's ever changing because time is constantly evolving. So we go through and we use our archive data. So it's not real time when we're doing a lot of our analytic pieces. And that makes it a little bit easier so we don't have to do that. And then we set up some of our outlier policies in those indexes. And then we add in other things like our shifts. So for instance, we have 3 shifts, A, B, and C. Well, that's not necessarily contained in our CAD data. So we add that in with another another piece of software, and then that is pushing everything out to model out within and it's Esri is our dashboard that we're using for that. So through an experience builder, and that's been very beneficial for us. There are other ones we've used, whether it was Power BI but since we're dealing with a spatial part of things and we want to see things within a map, or we want to segment based off of polygons, like our first due areas. That's why we choose to utilize the Esri products specifically for those dashboards when we're talking about our spatial aspects of it.
Awesome. That's very helpful. I know a lot of folks would, they're scribbling notes on that right now. So very, very useful information.
Yeah. That would be everything that we're doing with either the dashboards or a lot of our analytics. It works out really well when we're doing things based off of spatial stuff, because that's kind of how our operational members see things within first due boundaries, within battalions, within our county, outside for mutual aid. That's a lot of the ways that they're thinking about things. So those are the questions that they have, like how many calls did we run outside of the county? How many times did people come into the county? Or how many times did this unit operate outside of its first due? And when we're dealing with that, the polygons or the shapes that we can segment information by are very useful for that.
Absolutely. You guys are doing a presentation at TSI on. You caught my attention with that. We were talking at one of the other conferences we were at. Who knows? We go to a lot of shows, but we were talking about a project where you had looked at your ERF related to rural and suburban and urban classifications, right? That you had done something that was pretty interesting. I thought maybe it would have been counterintuitive if you without the data, but with the data, you made some decisions that were pretty interesting, and you were successful in getting it funded and staffed, which is really the ultimate benchmark. Is can you actually put bodies in a seat based on that information? Tell us a little bit about that project and how you did it, and some of the key parts and whatnot.
Sure. So some time ago, in 2019 we had a study done, an operational service plan done, and they had some recommendations based off of planning zones to kind of separate things out. And I'm going to make it it's going to be a little long-winded, so I apologize. But before we get to that part, let me just mention a couple of things that are specific to Loudoun County, so that it'll kind of tie all together. So if you're unaware about Loudoun County, it's in Northern Virginia. It's about 30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. We have the Potomac River to the north. And on our west side, we also have the Appalachian Trail that kind of goes in and out of our county. We're a partial home to Dulles International Airport, which sits between Loudoun and Fairfax counties. And in addition, we have recently had the Metro line, which is Washington, D.C.'s primary public transportation trains that come in and out. So we have the Metro trains running in and out from D.C. to the airport and so on. And we're about 521 square miles overall. And some of the issues that we have is that we have a very rural section of the county, which is shown with farms, wineries, that type of infrastructure. And on our east side, we have the airport, and we're also home to about 115 data centers. So we're the data center hub of the world. So we have a lot of urban interface, and then we also have a very rural interface. So it's very challenging as we're trying to work through as one single fire department to be able to assess and serve the needs of this community as well as this one. And I'll let, if Maria has anything else to add about some of those the rule segmentations and so on, or the zoning aspects of it. She's more versed in that than I am. Maria, do you have anything to add?
When we were working on the service plan, which was going to upgrade and establish our service delivery goals. And with that, we have three separate service delivery goals, one for the urban area, one for the metro area, and one for the rural. And the reason for that is because there's a transition area that's designated by the comprehensive plan for the county. And that section is pretty much dividing the county in sections. And that section of town doesn't have the right infrastructure. Like the roads are not paved, they're not wide enough. So in terms of having one set of benchmarks for all of the county would not work for us. So without municipal water, without the proper road network, and then a number and the distance between the developments. So you have lot sizes that are 3 acres, lot sizes that are 20 acres, and then large parcels that have been owned by families for a really long time, and also the breweries and wineries and a lot of wedding venues. So you have a lot of daytime population and a lot of entertainment and economic development that's on the West End without the water and the road network and all of that stuff. So when we are trying to establish a location for a fire station, sometimes, as you know, a building doesn't necessarily solve those problems because we still have the travel times and the water concerns to actually be able to provide that service. So when this service plan was established to determine what our service delivery goals were going to be, going with that model of having 3 separate response time goals was going to help us pretty much establish the goals for the department for the future. So with the metro coming in, and then with the urban area, and then with the rural area, everything is different and it's based on what we have. So the county has some, in terms of triggers for a new fire station, for as much as the fire chief and myself have fought to establish capital intensity factors, which is the actual triggers that we use for determining when we need a fire station. They want to do it based on population. Well, if we were going to put a fire station every 25,000 people, as they established that to be our capital intensity factor, we will have 30 fire stations on the east end. Same reason in the rural area. If we were doing it on population alone, we will have stations everywhere, but no population to serve them, or no way to getting to them. So when we did the service plan, we worked on getting a companion document that was a station siting document, which was to determine the needs of the department for the next 20 years, where our stations were going to be and why those stations were going to be located where we're proposing them. And then based on, as you mentioned, that we worked with the fiscal plan and the CIP to get those funded. So in the next 6, 7, 8 fiscal years, then we have our stations kind of lined up for funding based on the study that we were working on.
Make sure a capital intensity factor, is that the right term you were using?
Mm-hmm. And
what does that exactly entail?
For different counties, this is the number that we use to determine when a station or any facilities, they have capital intensity factors for schools, they have them for police departments, they have them for libraries, but those facilities are a lot easier to be done by population because you have so many students, you need a school. For us, people alone won't determine where our stations are going to go. We need to be able to, it's depending on the hazards we're protecting, it depends on the road network, how quickly we can get to where we need to go. And with Loudoun being so close to DC, and it's a dorm, like a pretty much a dormitory community to DC, a lot of people live in Loudoun, work in DC. So we have a lot of traffic moving from the West End, West Virginia, Maryland, moving through Loudoun to get to DC to work. So we have a lot of our response times being affected by traffic and being affected by that extra amount of traffic that we deal with on a daily basis.
So what I want to try to catch for the audience. So aside from the population that's commonly used in the capital intensity factor, what other metrics did you look at? Like, is response times one?
So we try to work through that, and we usually have to make the case with data and presenting some of those maps and some of those charts to demonstrate our coverage concerns and where our challenges are in terms of coverage. And usually we have to explain how population alone is not our only matrix. So we do work with time and distance. We also work with whatever hazards we're trying to protect. For example, in the metro area, the development is a lot more clustered together. And some of the zoning will allow the roads to be, a little bit narrower and things like that. So we need to really be aware of what the development is allowing and use that information to try and make the best decisions about where to locate a station. And not only that, now that we do not have, land is just not available. So say I need 5 acres of land in somewhere on the East End, which is where 2 of our future stations are to be located. We're going to have to get creative, and that's part of what we do in this section, is try to come up with ways that maybe a building is not the solution. Maybe we move some units around. Maybe we add staff to existing stations, or we try to do a different model of fire stations. So now the future of Loudoun County, it's gonna be based on what we can demonstrate and how we can propose to resolve a concern if it presents itself with data.
Interesting. So it's kind of like a risk assessment that we're used to doing, maybe through the accreditation process or just emergency management, but for a different target audience, really. I'm getting a new perspective on your department in particular, because your unique marriage of data, technology, and planning. And planning is often absent, from the equation. So it's interesting. That's a new part of the puzzle that I'm not sure a lot of fire departments have put together. to have that planning perspective in the room.
Well, the audience, it's really what becomes challenging, because you're trying to talk to budget people and everything is based on, so when do you need a station and where and how much? Well, that's not an easy answer. So we have
Right.
been, and we have a really good relationship with our board of supervisors and with our county administrator and some of our budget staff as well, because we try to come prepared to those meetings we try to anticipate the questions that they're going to have. So we're better prepared to answer them. And Captain Charles, myself, the fire chief, our operations bureau, our facilities staff, we all kind of come together and collaborate on a lot of that information. So the fire chief is prepared to answer those questions at budget time.
Great. That's amazing. Fantastic. I wish I had that back in the day to have that planning perspective. Like we were just, I know a lot of fire departments aren't even in the room yet when it comes to being at the planning table. So that's amazing that you're that far downrange. And
yeah, one other thing that
dynamic duo
we're lucky to have is a demographer that works for the county in the Office of Management and Budget, and they are also they publicize their information, their data for population forecasts utilized in story maps or like an Esri product. They typically have done those through these areas called the transportation analysis zones, which are not like a little census tract, but it's kind of like their own specific area to our county. So and there's multiple of them. So instead of us doing a whole bunch of additional work, what we were able to do to figure out the population of our first due areas or our immediate response areas for each one of our fire houses was to drop on all of our first due areas and kind of like a cookie cutter, just slice it straight down and then sum up all the values of the population because they overlap. The transportation analysis zones and the first due, they don't follow the same borders, right? So we end up putting a cookie cutter down through summing all those up, and then we can get a population for each individual first due area. The nice thing is that they do it on a 5-year increment. So then we've taken past population data, then we add in our incident data, and now we can identify our calls per capita or our emergency calls per capita. And that's useful because those first dues encompass all of those other demographics of that community. So like when we have rural boxes, well, that encompasses that. We might not know all of the different socioeconomic changes or values or trends for that one specific area. But at that moment, we don't necessarily need to. We just know that this segment of people called 911 this amount of times. So then we can utilize that ratio, and then we can look at forecasted populations all the way to 2040 and then anticipate what our incident volume could be. So then if we take that, we can start to anticipate the number of emergency incidents that could be, assuming everything else stays the same. So the nice thing about that is that the county demographer will go through and look at transportation plans, look at all the other zoning plans, things that are online up until the year 2040 and encompass them within that report for their population projections, which is helpful. So I'm not sure if that all makes a whole bunch of sense, but we take all of that and then we can keep on moving forward to answer the question of how many more ambulances we need, what types of ambulances, how many firehouses, so on.
No, it's a very interesting and valuable baseline to understand. That was almost a topic unto itself, right? To understand planning and understand demographics and how they can be used to articulate future call volume is a very important part of that. We've been kicking this around. I remember a friend of mine, Shane Ray, first had an Excel spreadsheet on this back probably 20 years ago, where we were, just I call it redneck math in it kind of a little bit. We were trying to figure out just on the information we could get at the time, if you built this thing, what kind of call volume would it generate? Now you're looking at, I just wrote down this new term I think I'm going to start using. I'm going to call it metro rural, because you got, what you have there is not rural. I mean, it's rural, but it's not really regular rural. It's like, there's people going out there doing stuff, because you have that population base so close. They're out there at the wineries, they're out there at the weddings, they're out there doing all the things, which gives you a whole different kind of target hazard to deal with. And do y'all have trouble with bridges?
Oh,
and that
yeah.
kind of that seems to be, particularly in Virginia where it's hilly. We can have a lot of, and our trucks are heavy. You have heavy fire trucks, so that's always a challenge.
That's another show, I think. I mean, we have had a number of issues recently with posted weight limits changing because of the conditions of the bridge. So we are working with our Department of Transportation and Capital Infrastructure and VDOT and the localities to kind of pin down what those posted weight limits are, and doing individual studies of each bridge to make sure that our apparatus are okay to cross them, independent studies to get individual permissions for each vehicle to cross. So yeah, we can talk about that a different day, but yeah, it's never a dull moment around here.
Yeah, it's complex, certainly. So let's start walking towards the ERF. I was very curious. Tell us about how you did that analysis and what that outcome was like.
So right now, as we know how the county's kind of laid out with our rural section and our metro and urban. So in our urban area, it's not too difficult to anticipate that we're going to do a lot of our station placement based up off of population and population density. So when we started using that same methodology and looking into the rural areas, that really wasn't going to work because there wasn't a plan then to build any more fire stations, because the population projections aren't really going to justify it the way that they're justified in the east end of the county. So we started looking back at, well, what problems do we have in the west end in our rural section? And we still are limited with meeting our ERF, or our effective response force. And for what a lot of people may not know is, we look at and try to figure out, well, how many firefighters does it take to mitigate a structure fire within this area? And how fast do we have to have those firefighters on scene? So for us, we want to have 24 firefighters on scene in our rural planning zone. So that rural planning zone is generalized as being like a single family home. That can change in an urban area and so on. In our urban area, we want to get 28 there, 28 firefighters on the scene. In our metro zone, we want to get 34. And we have specific times that we want to try to do that. Well, when we're looking at the rural areas, we're not able to get there. And it's not because of, the population is spread out. And to give you an idea, we're talking about 130 people per square mile, roughly. So, and I'm going to touch on a comparison in a moment. So just 130 per square mile is a good benchmark to here in our rural area. But just like Ms. Taylor elaborated earlier on the road infrastructure, the road infrastructure is limited, the width, the size, the type, to be able to get a lot of fire apparatus from point A to point B in a realistic amount of time. So we started looking at a gap analysis based up off of geography, and started looking at, well, if we're operating on a structure fire in this first due area, where are all of its help stations coming from? In like a more elementary term. So I call them like a helper station. And it's like, well, they're coming from all over and they're coming from far out. So where could we put another station that may not have a population density, might not even have a lot of people around it, but it's at a great place that could help to accelerate response times? Like if we could put it on a thoroughfare, that would be great, because now we're able to cover a larger geographical area in a shorter amount of time, because the apparatus may not have to combat with traffic signals. It might be able to have a higher speed limit. and it can go in a farther direction. So while we started to do that, we found an optimum location that is between 5 and 7 miles of a half a dozen stations. So, and those are all the rural stations. And one of the issues that we combat with is trying to get those firefighters on scene from a safety aspect. Because if we have our first in fire truck get there, and there's somebody that happens to be in the home and they end up pulling a line to go inside, well, we all know about building construction these days. Luckily, a lot of those homes in the rural area, a lot of them are built in an earlier time, but a lot of them are still pretty new. So we know that time frame. And so now it's like a safety thing where we really need to try to get those units, more units there faster. If we can't meet our ERF time, at least we're going to be improving it. So that became that strong metric that we were honing in on, like population density, to help to support the needs of that area, because the needs were just different. It wasn't based up always off of call volume, but more or less like the low frequency, high risk events like a structure fire that might happen out in that community, that we really needed to be able to support that, and also support for the second call or the third call. So even when one unit is capable of being able to mitigate a generalized emergency, a small outside fire or something along those lines, what happens when the next call comes in? Because we know outside fires, if you have one, you probably have two or three. So what are we doing about that? So we noticed that, we're not getting a whole bunch of calls out in these areas, but when we do have a call, the acuity is pretty high and it's going to happen again. So we need to plan for that second and third call. So those were those metrics that we concentrated on, more so than on population density, like we did on
And
our
the
east
other
side.
part about the houses that are on the rural area is that they are the larger, more. I mean, with the part that we have not mentioned yet is that Loudoun County, it's quite affluent, and the houses are larger, and there's a lot of horses and animals, and so anytime that we have a call in that section of town, there's many things to consider, and the fact that we don't have municipal water, we're still doing this with rural water systems, underground water tanks, and dry hydrants. So there's a lot that we consider when we're making a decision, like what we're discussing.
Yeah, that's something. They're really commercial fires. If you want to be from a firefighting standpoint, some of the size of these homes can be quite large in the what I'll call the metro rural areas, where the money's, you're close enough for the money to get out there, to the what we would call a rural setting. How are you crunching the numbers? How are you running them? How are you handling how are you analyzing that? What tools do you use for that?
So a couple things. Like the people, we have definitions that help to constitute our rural, urban, and metro planning areas, and they're dynamic. So as more things are built in our urban areas, it can extend into those rural areas, and now they become urban again, or not urban again, but they now become urban. But a lot of the things that we've ended up doing is a variety of different analysis through different types of programs. We recognize that when using a single analysis or a single resource, a lot of the times we wouldn't have a strong buy-in as to, from our leadership or peers when we went through to do things. So what we would have to do is we would have to do a variety of different analysis. So for a lot of what I was mentioning in regards to that helper station or like the ERF, we looked a lot at proximity analysis, doing time and distance, and those are tools that are used within Esri. So we're identifying, where's our 11-minute travel time from all of our current stations, and where is our gap? Where are we not meeting that area, that the area that is not being touched by any of these stations? And then, so we did a variety of different types of time and distance models for that. We also looked at our unit hour utilization stuff, or our committed time, we tend to use a committed factor as the term, which is just meaning that how much time is it one unit being spent on an emergency call, and where that's something that's in the rules area, we kind of tend to forget that the amount of travel time to a hospital and then to come back, they may run half of the calls of another firehouse that's in a more urban area, but their committed time is exactly the same because they spend so much time traveling on the streets to get back and forth from another location. So we looked at those, and we've used the Deccan software. There's an optimization aspect for firehouse placement for apparatus, and that works out very well. So we've used those pieces. The nice thing about that is that you can also segment it based up off of battalions or whatever shape files that you've added to it. So for instance, like for us, we can say, well, we're going to be looking for an appropriate firehouse location within our rural planning zone. And then we also want to then look at it based up off of previous incidents, or off of geographic area. So like, kind of like the geographic thing is probably what we used to do a long time ago, where we just sit there and draw circles around the firehouses and see like, well, where's our gaps at? And if we need to add one. So, and we can weigh it, we can adjust the weight on that. So we can look at it as 70% geographic and 30% historic incident data. But we looked at it all because with any one result, there was always another question. Well, what does this mean from the population standpoint? What does it mean from our incidents that we've run? So we've had to use a multitude of different pieces to all point into the right direction to be like, this is what this means. This is what we need to be able to take away from this. And that's sometimes the challenging part is we have a bunch of data that's out there. We have all these numbers, but what does it really mean? And once you try to put it all together, it's kind of like a recipe for a cake. You have all these ingredients, all this data that's going in there, and you have to take it and figure out what is it all going to be. And sometimes that's a very challenging part because it could be staring you right in the face. Like, oh, I never even thought to look at ERF as a metric to make a determination on firehouse placement. But I don't know. Sometimes you go through those different things, and that's the benefit of doing a variety of different analysis. Sometimes one piece just becomes that common trend between them all.
Operational intelligence is the term I've coined lately for that. A lot of numbers, but what the heck does it mean to me as a chief? What can I make decisions with? So that's really what we're trying to do.
It's interesting about that, and we have experienced that a few times, is that you get your initial request for information and you work on that, and for the two of us, there's always more questions as we get into the meat of it. So we sometimes have to keep focus on what the original question was and answer that question, and then kind of go out that way, because you can't keep getting out and out and out trying to anticipate all the questions the chief is going to have or our budget people are going to have. But like we found that if we answer the original question and then kind of get a little broader on the review and the study, then you do a better job, a more comprehensive job trying to answer the questions that come from the original request. But then you get what happens if we do this? Well, we have to do that. So it's just interesting how dynamic a project can be. It can be something that you think you can do in 2 weeks, and it can take months.
For years.
6 months later.
For a year.
Yeah.
One last thing to mention. I mentioned the 130 people per square mile in the rural area, and I was going to come back to it. The one thing I was going to explain with that is that in our urban area, we're upwards of 2,500 people per square mile. And in our metro area, we're similar. It's actually a little bit lower because we have a lot of areas that still have not been developed. They've been purchased. They just have not been developed yet. But a kind of a cool metric that we ended up finding out the other day was that For the rural area, it represents 67% of the landmass of the county, but only 10% of the population. Whereas like the urban area, it represents a 25% of the landmass and 76% of the population. So it's neat when you think about it and you actually have numbers that represent or have that part on it. So.
And the end result of this analysis was you ended up staffing staffing rural stations at a higher level than what you might have done in the past. Am I right?
Yeah. So
it's
one of
future.
The future.
One of the recommendations that we had was if we were to increase on the personnel per engine, because we had, obviously, if you can have 4 people, that would be better than 3. And right now we have 3 in many of the firehouses, but we're working on getting 4, and we have 4 at some. So, and the nice thing with that is that we're meeting our ERF in our rural areas faster if we're riding with 4 people in that engine. So that's another one of those aspects of, a locality is looking at increasing personnel, that from the safety aspect, because we're going to meet our ERF faster if we have larger numbers of personnel on the apparatus that are going to get there.
It's interesting from a tactical perspective because, the goal is to get the people there. And particularly in a rural area, when you're trying to overcome distance, it makes a lot of sense to staff those units with a higher number. Where the typical thinking is, you always put your people towards the highest call volume and those types of things. But the ultimate answer is to staff all the units with the proper amount of people, and we won't have this problem. But I'm in dreamland doing that from a budget perspective. So I thought that was interesting that a lot of fire departments that are in suburban areas would find that work something really interesting and to want to look at that. Maybe that might change the way they model their staffing. And I think one of the biggest kind of goals with data analytics is to try to get the data out in front of the budget so that by the time we actually get to where the need is obvious, we could have addressed it. Like I always say, it's 3 years to get people and 5 to 7 years to get a building, probably more like 7. So it seems like now. So you've got to have that data way in advance of that so that you can make your case in the budget process. Mm-hmm. So, that's really what we're always fighting time, I guess, one way or the other, whether it be in response times or in the budget cycle, one way or the other, we're always fighting time. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. It seems. So what else is cooking in the data shop over there? What are you guys working on now that is coming up?
Well, we've been doing a lot of other things like with EMS operations. So one piece is, if we think about how units are dispatched on calls, and they're dispatched as, EMS or fire. And then if it's EMS, then it's ALS or BLS, and kind of go down through these, different circumstances. What we started to look at more is the patient care reports. So we have in our locality, we have EMT basics, we have EMT advanced, we have EMT intermediates, EMT paramedics, and then we have an advanced paramedic, which is like our EMS supervisor. So we started looking and saying, well, where do we need to place those units? Like we have a variety of these units. So what justifies the needs of having an advanced unit over a medic unit or over a basic unit? Or what about, should we have ALS providers on suppression apparatus? If so, what's the level? And trying to trim and work with that data. So we found it so far, it's more beneficial to look at it from a patient care report aspect than on how the units are dispatched, because the call is constantly progressing as we're still treating and transferring to the hospital, right? So now we're looking at the procedures that are done, the doses, the types of medications, the volume of dose, and so on, that will bucketize that one report into one of those areas. So whether it's a basic call, an advanced call, paramedic, advanced paramedic, we have a whole blood program that's administered by our EMS supervisors. So we carry blood We can do a lot of other things in the field that we've been advanced on. So we're trying to look at, well, where do those incidents happen, and what are the thresholds to justify additional EMS supervisors, or the adjustment on their assigned locations where they should be. So that's been kind of neat, because we're putting it into one of those boxes, which the patient care reports haven't really been categorized like that before. They're categorized based off of the call and how it's dispatched. So a lot of the times we might dispatch a medic unit as the closest transport unit, but it's not a medic call. It's a BLS call. So we're trying to do that as a way of doing elaborate or working on a more beneficial resource management tool. And then we're going back and we can apply these same criteria to historic calls and historical incidents. And now we can start to look at trends for certain areas, and we've confined them to a first due area. So now we can say, well, for fiscal year 23, in this one first due area, 90% of the calls were BLS calls. 10% were advanced level calls. So what does that mean to us? Well, that means that we probably don't need a medic unit in that area. Right now, we could be okay with a basic level, but we're also looking at where those calls, different transport units coming in. So, if one unit is in one first due area and it's operating on 90% of its calls in that area, it's great. But if that one's operating at 90, but all of the surrounding ones are operating like a few percentages into that first due area, that's the justification, usually from the committed factor or the UHU, that says, well, you need another unit in that area. And then this is the type of unit that you need. So, because in the past, we've just been able to say, well, we need another transport unit, but we can't really distinguish what level of skill level of that transport unit. So that's very helpful as we look at things from a budgetary aspect for the future, because it takes a longer duration of time to be able to turn over paramedics than it does to have a BLS provider. So it's about kind of triaging those units and adjusting your resources to maximize service delivery.
So when you talked about, Captain, the resource management, I think that one of the things that we have been spending some time in conversations and trying to establish our processes, just so we have a established process for each of this requests that we get. So the next time we get it, we know that that's how it was done in the past for consistency purposes. But also, you earlier mentioned that someone had a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet. So we had a lot of spreadsheets going around the department in different ways of capturing data and the way that people were using that. So we're trying to kind of bring that into a more localized and more established process. For credibility, and also because this is not just for budget purposes. I mean, these are also internal decisions that we're making and trying to get all these different sections to talk to each other, like our EMS section and our operations section, and we have, our budget and CAD and our GIS analysts and everyone. So we're trying to kind of talk to each other more, trying to keep things a little bit more focused and using the same process, so we obtain the same results when we are providing information. So we don't have to explain why this number is different, or why we were doing so well last year and we're not doing as well this year, or the other way around. I think is very important to keep our historic progress and our process is pretty clear.
Yep, I know that was something we had not evolved to yet before I retired, and the ability to document and replicate process is an important part of it. We often focus on the numbers and the analytics, but don't forget to write it down how you did it. Particularly there's a lot of movement in the data world. Like retention is a challenge. with data analysts and stuff. So if you're, it's important to capture the process. So if you do have a new person sitting in the seat, at least they know how they came to that number that they're looking at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important piece of it. I wanted to talk real quick before we go about the Metro Fire Planners, because a lot of the stuff we talked about today were kind of topics at the conference,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think a lot of people may not understand what that is. It's Metro Fire Planners. So it's a kind of a subgroup of Metro Fire Chiefs, right? Is that how that's put together?
It started about 40 years ago, and it's a roundtable discussion. And at that point, there were a few Metro fire departments that will get together after Metro Chiefs and just kind of talk about, how do you do this? How do you do that? Well, have you used this software? Have you tried this? How many, people you have in this unit or whatever. And it kept growing a little bit, but it is the best kept secret in the fire service. There's a conference that is held every year. And I've been attending for 23 years. I am the vice chair of the board of directors, and we hold the conference in a different city every year. And what we do is we keep the number to about 60 to 70 people so we can actually have a conversation. And we have an agenda of topics that are submitted by the attendees, and we pretty much just talk about it. We sit around the table, pass the microphone, somebody asks a question, and the departments that have the experience with that subject talk about it. And the people that then their follow-up questions, and there's some networking opportunities that then we use to follow up on those topics. We are very fortunate to have great sponsors that take the information that when we discuss a problem, their wheels are turning, trying to work out how their software can help us in answering those questions. And year round, we keep in touch. And when you think of something that, I know somebody in Houston that knows about this or talked about this at a conference, and you just grab your minutes or grab your list of attendees and give them a call. And that has been an incredible resource for me when especially you have departments that bring people from the field, for example, Captain Charles, and 3 years later, this person goes back to the field and you get a brand new person coming into that position. So bringing that person into the conference and letting them see what it's like to be in the office, right? It's like you're out in the field, and they want to know how the decision makes, who makes and why, and all that stuff. So they're able to learn from the rest of us that have been helping make those decisions, and just learning from years of just attending this conference. It's pretty amazing.
I went for my second time this past year, and it really is probably one of the most interesting conferences I've ever attended, because you really get a broad scope of what's going on in the fire service and hearing what the real world problems actually are.
Good and bad.
I thought it was really enlightening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good and bad, right? Yeah, I left with a lot of questions, actually. Like, I'm not sure if we're doing that the right way. Maybe there's a better way to approach something, from a fire service perspective. But it's metrofireplanners.com if you want to learn more about it. Just keep an eye on it. I want to thank y'all for coming on the show. It's been really interesting. I have learned a lot. Like the planning, the dynamic duo, I'm going to call you now, because you have the planning and you have the data and you have the operations all wrapped up in one small, though be it small team, very effective team that's doing some tremendous work up there in Loudoun County. So I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Fire Service Data and Tech Talk. You can find us on fireengineering.com. Be sure to tune in next month. We'll be back for another episode. And you can find us on social media. We're on Twitter at Data Tech Talk. And you can always find me on LinkedIn too, or on the Facebook page for the show. So hope everybody has a good November. Have a good Thanksgiving. And we'll see you in December. Be safe.
Fire Service Data and Tech Talk.
The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision the Firestore makes as a company is about its customers. As the holiday season has quickly approached, explore a wide selection of unique and practical gifts at the Firestore's Gift Center. Find the perfect presents for firefighters, EMTs, and first responders today. The Firestore's goal is to get you the gear you need when you need it at prices you can afford. Visit thefirestore.com for everything but the truck and shop its family of brands including Streamlight, MSA, Lion, Fleer, and more.